All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, the City Council announces new legislation requiring the NYPD to undergo specific training on how to interact and engage with people on the autism spectrum. Also, the battle between landlords and tenants has continued to erupt in the news. The lawyer is here to tell us more about this issue and reminds our viewers what right to counsel means. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. All right, hello, welcome to Today's Verdict, the interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet me at David Lesh and hashtag AskToday'sVerdict if you have a question, and check us out at bronxnet.tv. Currently, more than 300,000 New Yorkers are on the autism spectrum. A new bill will require special training for the NYPD to enhance awareness, understanding, and providing interpersonal skills to safely respond to emergencies. Here to tell us more is Councilman Eric Dinowitz. Eric, first time to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's really exciting. This is my first time on the show and first time on BronxNet.
Well, is that true?
It's my first time in the studio.
Well, there's no better show than starting out Today's Verdict.
I'm glad to be here.
Talk about a little bit of you. You were a special education teacher.
I was. In fact, I taught in the adjacent building at the Walton campus and over at the John F. Kennedy campus, right here in the Bronx, children with disabilities.
So you know firsthand how difficult it is to be, first of all, to be a parent of one of these children, and how hard it is for the children themselves just to be able to manage their day-to-day.
Yeah, I think that's one of the first things I learned was that, you know, the students with disabilities walk around, they know they have a disability, they see their peers doing things that they struggle to do. And you're absolutely right, being in a family, the parent of a child with a disability is a real challenge. And that was a lot of the work that we teachers, that I did as a teacher, and a lot of us teachers do, is working with the family to do what's best for the kid.
Well, it's a very rewarding job, and maybe it led you to this particular legislation that we're talking about today, making sure the NYPD is a little more sensitive to dealing with those who are on the spectrum. And I guess my first question to you is, was there a particular impetus for this legislation? Was there one particular, adult that was manhandled in a bad way? What would you think? Or has it just been an ongoing issue that I think it's time to be addressed?
I think we talk a lot about diversity in the council. Yeah. One of the things we don't talk about is diversity of what our families look like in the council. And person after person in the council, when they voted on this, said, I'm really happy to vote for this. My nephew, my cousin.
Everybody has somebody, right?
Yeah, and the sponsor, the lead sponsor of this bill, Mercedes Narcisse, really obviously spearheaded this and speaks very passionately about the need that very often the police are the first to a scene when there is some sort of crisis. And we want the very first people on the scene to make sure that they have the training to handle the situation most appropriately so that everyone remains safe.
Now, from what I know of the disorder, a lot of times the individuals, they can't respond back to you, they don't look at you, they don't like being touched. There's a whole host, I guess, of issues that the NYPD really needs the training. Who's going to train them into the,
I think you're touching on something very important for us. We love to put things into boxes, and we love to define disabilities, and to some degree it's important to do that, but being on the spectrum is just that. It's a spectrum, and it looks different ways to different people, and it feels different for people who are on the spectrum, and that's where the training comes in. I think you're right. There are some who are nonverbal. Yeah. There are some who, for whom different stimuli affect them differently. And of course, in one of the most high-profile and most heartbreaking cases was the case of Elijah McClain a few years back, where he was on the spectrum. Someone called the cops because he was wearing a mask. This was before COVID. And the police, you could see it in the video, immediately became very aggressive with him. And I think in about 9 seconds, had him on the ground and told him to calm down and relax. I mean, no one's going to calm down if someone's arms around their throat and they're on the ground. But the EMTs were also not kind of aware of the way we're supposed to talk to people and treat people, particularly people on the spectrum. And so that's why the training is important, so that our NYPD, again, those people who are typically first to respond when there's a crisis, know what they're looking at, know how to approach situations so that we all remain safe.
Well, in terms of the range itself, because there is such a range, I just wonder who's going to train them for this, because, you know, psychologists and psychiatrists spend years understanding each individual patient who, you know, has autism or is autistic. You just wonder, you know, how these NYPD candidates, cadets, or who are right out of school, basically, are going to be shown the way to understand that this person I'm dealing with is on the spectrum. I mean, it's not like they say to the officer, by the way, I have autism, can you please treat me differently? They're not going to say that. You know, I just wonder how someone's going to be trained to see that. Yeah,
it's interesting. If you go to the certain autism advocacy organizations, they'll often say some tips. They shouldn't have to reveal whether or not they have autism. That's up to them.
Right.
They recommend, if you want, you can carry a card that says, that you have autism. But, again, it shouldn't be on the person who's on the spectrum to interact with the police that way, right? And that's where the training is so important, to recognize and know how to approach someone. And honestly, the police really should, all things being equal, be approaching people in a way that is typically not aggressive, especially if there's no weapon. The calls that they typically get for in these types of situations, when there's no weapon, there's no need to necessarily be in an aggressive state.
But there's always backlash somewhere whenever there's legislation that's being introduced.
Yeah.
You know that. Is the NYPD reluctant to take on another? I mean, listen, they got hit pretty hard for the last couple of years, and there is a lot is expected of our police force. Right?
Yeah.
And there's no question about it. Not saying it's not expected of them, and it should be expected of them. It's justified, is what I'm trying to say. But there is so much more expected of them. Every year, there's something else we're asking of them. With body cams and how to approach somebody, and what do they think about this? That this is a whole new way of life for them.
So it's actually, interestingly, on the floor. This was on the floor of the city council during the stated meeting. This was I want to call it a fight, but it got pretty emotional because you had people who voted against it. And they voted against it because they said the police should not be involved in these types of calls to begin with. That was the general consensus. Police, when it comes to someone, having whatever, and it's not violent, the police shouldn't be involved to begin with, so they voted against it. But others saying, look, this is the reality in which we live. The police are called, the police are there first to respond, and the first responders at a scene should be aware and trained on how to approach someone. I think there's a lot of conversations about what the police do, how much they do, and we in the City Council certainly look at that as well. I mean, last year in the city budget, we funded $50 million in the Be Heard program, and the Be Heard program is really sort of saying exactly what you're touching on, which is if there's a nonviolent mental health crisis, you should be able to call a mental health crisis counselor instead of a police officer, someone who is really, truly trained to diffuse the situation and really support the person or the family or the group of people that are in crisis.
I mean, look when you were a teacher, right? A special education teacher. Those kids in your class you knew were autistic and had issues, or whoever the special education kids were. You're told so you already know going in there how to deal with them. This isn't like you're given a class and you have to decide how much of the class is special needs or needs help and how much of the class. So it's different. You knew it already.
Well,
and I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes and no. I mean, just because a child has a disability doesn't mean they're going to have an emotional crisis. Yeah. And just because a child doesn't have an IEP, a a disability, they can still have an emotional crisis. In fact, a lot of reports say in the Black and brown communities that autism is underdiagnosed, and because the resources aren't there to provide the testing and things like that, or that when they are diagnosed, it's at a later age in life. And so just from my perspective as a teacher, I didn't go into the classroom, although when we had mixed classes, we knew which students had IEPs and which didn't. I didn't go into a classroom labeling my students because the label doesn't always match what they need.
Right.
Again, just because you don't have a labeled disability doesn't mean you're not going to have an emotional crisis.
Are there other groups next that you think that might be afforded some special attention that the NYPD should be looking at? It's a tough question because there are so many other groups that need a little more, handling.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this. It's in the holistic sense.
Right.
Students, or people with on the autism spectrum, so people with emotional needs, really anyone facing an emotional crisis. We talk about hate crimes and cultural competency. That's been a huge discussion, especially in a council as diverse as ours. So there is certainly a lot more work to do. Really, not just educating the NYPD and training NYPD, really educating and training all of us.
Please, we all should know this.
Yeah.
Because we deal with this all the time. What else are you working on? What else is going on in the district?
There's a lot going on. I mean, just the last stated meeting, I introduced a few resolutions to support students, to encourage the city to use the Seal of Biliteracy, which is a statewide program, which really recognizes students' ability to speak English and another language, which really support especially our students from our L students from other countries and who don't speak one of the 8 languages on the AP exam. And I'm excited about this because it was actually written in conjunction with 2 college students as part of a program, so I'm very excited about this. But the big thing going forward right now is the budget.
Yeah.
The mayor has proposed an executive budget that severely cuts so many of our city services and city agencies, including CUNY, including Lehman College, and all of our CUNY campuses. And I chair the Higher Education Committee, and we hear hearing after hearing about the incredible opportunities colleges provide for our students. But what's, I think, so astounding to me is how fiscally responsible it is to invest in our CUNY system. For example, last year, the City Council put forth an initiative at Speaker Adams and the City Council, CUNY Reconnect. It was a $4.4 million investment to bring students back to college who had some college credit, but for whatever reason, they didn't finish college. It brought them back, provided wraparound services, counselors, Metro cards, and we brought 16,000 students back to CUNY. And when I asked CUNY at the hearing, I said, just about in tuition dollars, how much money is that? They said $80 million in tuition money.
Wow.
So it is the right thing to do to invest in our students, but from a fiscal perspective, we are essentially making back $75.6 million. And that is a good investment by any measure.
I think that makes for a good topic for a future show, and I think you should be on here to discuss it the next time.
I'd love to come back.
All right. Well, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We have to take a quick break, but up next, attorney Altagracia Pierre Outerbridge tells us about a new law that would ban gas stoves. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. Of course, it's awkward to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping. Hey, bestie, how's sketches? Ready? It's hard to get their attention. Ready? Go. Yes, look at that. You even turn yours over. So if you want to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping, you have to get it trending. Right, Backpack Kid?
Let's do it.
First, invite your kid to do the vape talk. Let's try this. All right.
Why is he here?
Yeah, I gotta get it trending, honey.
Come on.
To the left. To the right. Let's go.
Oh, honey, can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
I see a lot of your friends vaping.
Visit talkaboutvaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
You're not gonna get it all right,
Just make sure you nail the big stuff,
Mama!
like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesh. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet me at David Lesh. The usual battle between landlords and tenants has erupted in the news. There is so much to discuss. Lucky for us, we have here attorney Altagracias Pierre Outerbridge, who has been here before, by the way, or not necessarily on set, but we had you on Zoom.
Yes.
You were talking about right to counsel a long time ago as a tenant, and which we know is so important. The reason why we wanted you back today, at least to talk a little bit about it, is it seems that, you know, the pendulum between power, between landlords and tenants, always seems to be back and forth and back and forth. And it looks like from where I'm sitting, the tenants have been getting a little bit more powerful based on what's been coming through Albany, or let's say the right to counsel, those types of things. I know you've been doing this a long time. Do you feel like the tenants are starting to gain a little traction here? Or is it still a landlord world in this city? Or what do you think?
Well, I'm always going to say, David, thanks for having me.
Of
I'm
course.
always going to say that it's a case-by-case basis. Depends on the facts, depends on the judge, right? Depends on a whole lot of things, right? Depends on the clerk in the courthouse. What is happening mostly at this point where landlords are now were able to get paid during the pandemic somewhat is that landlords are back with a lot of non-payment actions, right? Trying to get paid. I think tenants are at a disadvantage again. While the pandemic era laws, right, protected them, the safety net, what we call it a safety net, protected them. That safety net has ended. So we're back to the same, the position where tenants no longer have much protection in housing court.
So what do you think it is? And is it the tenants haven't been able to pay their rent because the stimulus has been cut? The moratorium is over. What's the reasoning? I mean, why can't the tenants seem to get back on their feet? Is it just they're not getting subsidies? Or is it just things are coming through the courthouse again and now it's all of a sudden they're being expected to leave?
It's all of what you just said, David. It's all of what you just said. Tenants, a lot of tenants are still carrying the pandemic debt, right? The ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, was not able to pay for all the debt. We have tenants coming to us owing 20, 30, 40K, and that clearly was not solely from post-pandemic. Some of the, so for some tenants, the ERAP paid some, but not for the whole of it. Some tenants, I believe the ERAP overpaid, so it's very unclear how the ERAP made the determination, but a lot of tenants were left out of the equation. So at this point, there were some protections that were kept on by New York State, i.e. if you applied for the ERAP, but that ended in January. If you applied for the ERAP, even if there were no monies available, the fact that you applied kept your eviction from proceeding forward. Right now, there's no real safety net except having a good attorney, obviously. And I'm going to talk about the right to counsel again.
If you could, please, because that's so important. I mean, to have somebody with you there who knows the law, who could advocate for you, tell it, you know, maybe you can give the viewers a little bit of a refresher. That would be important if you could.
Sure. The right to counsel was passed, and what it did is it, just like in criminal court, it provided for tenants who qualified income-wise and zip code-wise for a free lawyer in housing court. A lot of the difficulties that are occurring now is that there are not enough tenant attorneys to carry out the right to counsel mandate. So what's happening is tenants are going to court and getting what we call brief counseling, which is 5 to 10 minutes, and being told, go before the judge and make that argument, right? Never sounds the same coming from a pro se person. But ideally, if the right to counsel were properly effectuated, then most tenants would have a a housing court attorney. I have some problems with the, and I'm not able to tell you the exact numbers, but probably the income limit should be raised and the zip codes widened, because the pandemic really equalized a lot of folks from different walks of life, different professions. I've seen, we have engineers as clients, we have, right, who naturally would, before the pandemic, would not be non-payment clients, but a lot of people now from all walks of life, right, and all income levels are still carrying that debt. So ideally, the right to counsel would be expanded, right, to include higher incomes, right, and more zip codes. But that's where we are now with basically actually having attorneys on the ground. I actually recently received an email, not quite from New York City, but from New York State, saying we are so out of attorneys that we're looking for private attorneys to join the right to counsel because there's not enough attorneys.
Why is that?
Wow, that's a good question.
People are not signing up. I mean, you get paid. Mm-hmm. I mean,
that's a good question. It's a tough job. I did it for a decade. It's a very tough job. It's mentally exhausting. It's really being a public servant, right? And it requires a lot of passion. So I mean, if your head is not in it, you can't really do it. So it takes a specific type of attorney to be able to do that, because the tenants don't have the resources. The stories are all sad and horrible, right? About who you're helping. So it takes a certain type of person, and it exhausts you emotionally and physically.
So tell me, what do you do for a tenant? Tenant comes into your office and says, look, I've been served with a non-payment proceeding. What do you do for them? Like, what's the first thing you do? You put in an answer? Do you call up the landlord's attorney? How do you usually handle it?
Mm-hmm. So we try not to do non-pays, right, out of equity for folks who come to us, because what we counsel them, we often do brief counseling and say, this is what you do. You go to housing court, you do an answer, because we always try to balance the legal fees, right, compared to what's owed. And if it doesn't match up, then we don't get involved unless there's another issue in the apartment, i.e. overcharge, etc. What we tell the tenant usually, if we are taking the case, is that we ask how they were served. We basically develop the defenses. We find out if the apartment is improperly deregulated. We find out if the rent is correct. We ask about repairs, because as long as we're there, we might as well make sure we leave with the tenant feeling comfortable with all aspects of living in the place. We ask about harassment. So we cover the whole gamut. So if folks come to us with solely non-pay issue, we usually delve into everything else to make sure that at the end of representation, they feel that the apartment is up to par on every level.
And what have you seen in court recently? Mm-hmm. Does it seem that the tenants are being treated fairly? What are your thoughts?
I believe, I don't think it's the court position to, propose defenses. So to the extent that tenants are treated fairly, they have to come forth with their own defenses. The court, being a mediator, doesn't quite come up with the defenses. So the issue returns back to, what does the tenant have counsel? Do they know their defenses? Are papers being put in properly, timely, right? Is the approach, the defense, aggressive enough? In that sense, judges are reviewing motions, oral arguments are happening to make sure the defenses are being properly adjudicated.
Okay, let's put on your landlord cap for a second. Okay, let's flip sides here. Mm-hmm. What's the story about landlords? Are they happy with the way things are progressing in the city? Are they getting their money quicker? What are your thoughts?
Landlords are never happy. We try. Landlords are never happy, right? So, and we love them, right? We represent them just as well. But, they always have felt that the housing court process takes so long. They have a bad name. We represent small and large landlords. The small one believe that they are carrying the burden and the name, that they are being confused with big landlords, right? Folks who own 2-family homes, right? 3-family homes are really still trying to demarcate themselves from big landlords with hundreds of apartments and saying, how are we being treated the same? We need the money to pay our mortgage. There really should be some type of demarcation that treats us differently and markets us differently, right? So one of the initiatives that has come to be implemented because of this is the small property part. So each borough now has a small property part, which is a room where small landlords' cases are heard. The attorney has to propose it and ask that it be transferred. But the point there is to make sure that the cases are moving faster, because to consider what a small landlord has to go through. One of the big things, you asked me what tenants are going through. Tenants, we're getting calls daily about tenants facing 20, 30, 40% increases in rent. That comes at all hours of the night, all hours of the day. I'm always shocked as to what the rent increases are. So that's really a lot of what we're dealing with now. The landlords making up for pandemic losses by increasing the rent, proposing increase of 40, 50, 60%.
Final thoughts, okay? Tips. Somebody's watching today, it's a landlord, and you want to make sure the landlord gets the right type of tip. Not tenant, but we're going to start with the landlord this time. What tips would you give to a landlord to make sure that they're protected?
Don't let the rent accumulate, right? That's huge, because if the tenant is not able to pay today, it's unlikely they'll be able to pay in 6 months. So follow up on payment of the rent. Try to reach a deal with the tenant as to when the rent will be paid. Do not let it accumulate, because as it accumulates, it becomes unpayable, right? Seek counsel right away and get to court right away.
Okay, tenants now. What's your best advice that you would give to a tenant? You can give a few, because I know the tenants need a little bit more help.
In terms of tenants, keep track. If you're being served, keep track of how you're being served, right? That's a huge defense in court. Seek counsel right away, right? Check to see if your apartment, always check to see if you're being charged the right rent. One of the things you can do is by seeking what we call a rent history from DHCR to make sure that your rent and have an attorney analyze that to make sure that you're not being overcharged, right? Keep in communication with your landlord regarding repairs. Make sure that your repair requests are in writing and that you follow up. If your requests for repairs are being ignored, then you can commence a case. It's not burdensome to commence a case in housing court for repairs. It's called an HP action.
I love it.
All right.
All right, next time you come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about gas stoves, electric stoves. We can talk a little bit about that the next time.
Please.
Because there's so many things that we need to talk to you about.
I will.
But of course, thanks. It's nice seeing you in person.
Sure.
I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at bronxnet.tv. Also, remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org or tweet me at davidlesh, and make sure to hashtag #AskToday'sVerdict. From myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. I'm David Lesh, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks with an all-new episode of Today's Verdict. Take care.